The moment is crystal clear in my memory. The clink of champagne glasses, the hum of conversation around the table. My father's arm draped casually over my brother's shoulder. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying that familiar confidence that had always commanded rooms. "Now that Northstar Technologies is valued at $75 million, I think it's time for a change." He smiled. That warm smile that had reassured me countless times throughout my childhood. But this time, it wasn't meant for me. "Your brother David will be taking over as CEO effective next month." 12 years of my life, 12 years of sacrifice, innovation, and relentless work, all dismissed with a smile and a toast. I felt the air leave my lungs, but maintained my composure, raised my glass, and smiled back. What else could I do in a room full of family, investors, and employees? But that night set something in motion that would change everything. Not just for me, but for the entire company I had built from near bankruptcy to industry leader. What my father and brother didn't realize was that the next morning would be nothing like they expected. Because while they were busy planning my replacement, I had spent years preparing for a day I hoped would never come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Chen, and until last month, I was the Chief Operating Officer at Northstar Technologies, the company my father started when I was just 5 years old. Growing up, I watched him build Northstar from our garage in Seattle. Scrappy medical device startup with a single prototype and mountains of debt. Some of my earliest memories are sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, carefully organizing component parts into plastic bins while my father worked late into the night. "Pay attention, Becca," he'd say, holding up circuit boards and explaining their functions. "Someday this might all be yours." Back then, he seemed to believe it. Our family life revolved around the company. Dinner conversations centered on funding rounds and prototype failures. Vacations were regularly canceled when emergencies arose. My mother, a former nurse with a practical mindset, supported his dreams but maintained a certain distance from the business. "Someone has to keep this family grounded," she would say, making sure I still attended piano recitals and maintained a semblance of normal childhood despite our circumstances. My brother David was 4 years younger than me, and from the beginning, he approached the company differently. Where I was eager to understand every aspect of the business, he seemed almost allergic to it. When I'd come home from college excited to discuss what I'd learned in my business courses, he'd roll his eyes and escape to his room. He preferred sports, socializing, and later, the startup scene that had nothing to do with medical devices or our family legacy. I graduated from Stanford with dual degrees in biomedical engineering and business administration. It wasn't just academic interest that drove me. It was strategic preparation. I had witnessed too many late-night calls about cash flow problems, too many potential investors walking away, too many times my father's voice cracked when he thought no one was listening. I was determined to be the one who could turn things around. When I finally joined Northstar at 24, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. My father had created groundbreaking technology for non-invasive glucose monitoring, but struggles with FDA approval and manufacturing scale had drained our resources. We had 37 employees, a mountain of debt, and just enough runway for 6 more months. "I don't want charity," my father said gruffly when I presented my analysis on my first day. He still saw me as his little girl playing with parts on the garage floor. "This isn't charity," I replied, sliding my strategic plan across his cluttered desk. "This is survival. And if you want this company to last another year, you need to listen to me." To his credit, he did. Reluctantly at first, then with growing respect as my initiatives began to show results. I restructured our debt, streamlined our manufacturing process, and most importantly, pivoted our go-to-market strategy to focus on partnerships with established medical companies rather than trying to build our own distribution network. Within 18 months, we were cash positive. By year 3, we had quadrupled our staff and secured a major partnership with Johnson & Johnson. The turning point came in year 5 when our patented monitoring technology received full FDA approval, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of Northstar. Through it all, my father remained the face of the company, the visionary founder whose story made for compelling PR. I was fine working behind the scenes, the operational backbone who transformed his vision into reality. My official title was COO, but in practice, I was running almost everything except the most high-profile investor and media relations. "You've always been the steady one," my father would say, patting my shoulder after I helped navigate a particularly difficult quarter. "I don't know what this company would do without you." David, meanwhile, had tried his hand at various ventures: a social media app that failed to launch, a short-lived cryptocurrency trading platform, a brief stint at a venture capital firm, where he mainly networked rather than analyzed investments. Each time a venture failed, he'd return home, and my father would welcome him with open arms and encouraging words. "Keep trying, son. Failure is how we learn." I never begrudged him that encouragement. Everyone deserves support. What bothered me was the stark contrast in how our contributions were valued. My consistent success was expected. David's repeated failures were framed as brave attempts. When David expressed interest in joining Northstar in a leadership position 3 years ago, I was skeptical, but tried to be supportive. "He needs stability," my father insisted, "and it's important to keep the company in the family." I created a role for him as Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, an area where his networking skills could be useful, but where he would have limited ability to damage the core business operations. I assigned him a capable team and provided clear objectives. Yet within months, it became apparent that he viewed the position as ceremonial rather than functional. He attended industry events and hosted lavish dinners, but rarely followed through on the substantive work of building and maintaining partnerships. Still, my father seemed pleased to have him involved. "He's finding his way," he'd say whenever I raised concerns. "Not everyone approaches business the same way you do, Rebecca." Perhaps I should have seen it coming. Perhaps the signs were there all along in the way my father introduced us at industry events. "This is my son David. He'll be taking a larger role in the company soon, and this is Rebecca, our brilliant COO." Or in the private family dinners where he increasingly sought David's input on major company decisions, despite his lack of relevant experience. But I was focused on the work, building the company, solving problems, creating value. In the 12 years since I joined Northstar, we had grown from a struggling startup worth barely $2 million to a respected industry player valued at $75 million. We had expanded from one patented technology to a suite of integrated medical monitoring, devices used in hospitals around the world. Our staff had grown from 37 desperate souls to over 300 dedicated professionals. And most importantly, our technology was saving lives. The night everything changed was meant to be a celebration. We had just closed a major funding round that valued the company at $75 million and secured a partnership with the largest hospital network on the East Coast. I had led both initiatives, spending countless hours negotiating terms and addressing concerns. The dinner at Canlis, Seattle's most prestigious restaurant, was supposed to be a recognition of this achievement. The private dining room overlooked Lake Union, the city lights reflecting on the water as twilight settled over Seattle. Crystal glasses and fine china gleamed under subtle lighting. Around the table sat our executive team, key investors, and my family. The mood was jubilant. Quarter after quarter of growth had created a sense of invincibility. My father stood to make a toast just after the main course had been cleared. He looked distinguished in his tailored suit, his hair now more silver than black. his face lined with the stress and triumph of building a company from nothing. When I started Northstar in my garage 27 years ago, people said I was crazy, he began, his voice carrying that warm authority that had defined my childhood. Maybe I was, but sometimes it takes a bit of madness to change the world. Appreciative laughter rippled around the table. Today, our monitoring devices are used in over 2,000 hospitals worldwide. We've helped millions of patients and their doctors make better decisions about their care. And we're just getting started. He paused, looking around the room, before his gaze settled on me. For a moment, I thought he would acknowledge my role in this transformation. Instead, his eyes shifted to my brother, seated directly across from me. As we enter this exciting new chapter, it's time to think about the future of leadership at Northstar. The company has grown beyond what I could have imagined, and it needs fresh perspectives to reach its full potential. A subtle tension descended on the room. Our CFO Maya Patel shot me a questioning glance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's why I'm proud to announce that my son, David, will be taking over as CEO effective next month. His vision and relationship-building skills are exactly what Northstar needs as we scale to new heights. The room froze for a microsecond, before people recovered and began applauding politely. David beamed, accepting congratulatory handshakes from those seated near him. I sat motionless, the perfectly cooked Wagyu steak I'd been enjoying moments earlier now sitting like lead in my stomach. My father's hand rested on David's shoulder, pride evident in every line of his face. Rebecca has done tremendous work as our COO, and she'll continue to be invaluable in that role, supporting David's vision for the company. Supporting David's vision. The words echoed in my head as I mechanically raised my glass along with everyone else. I caught my mother's eye across the table. Her expression held a mixture of sympathy and resignation. She had always understood the dynamics at play better than I had wanted to admit. To the next generation of leadership, my father concluded, his smile directed at David. To Northstar, everyone chorused. I sipped my champagne and felt nothing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I maintained my composure, answering questions about upcoming product launches and deflecting inquiries about my father's announcement with practiced ease. Yes, it's exciting times for the company, I repeated until the words lost all meaning. David and I will be working closely to ensure a smooth transition. Maya cornered me by the dessert table, her voice low and urgent. Rebecca, what the hell? You built this company. Everyone knows that. I arranged my face into a pleasant smile in case anyone was watching. It's a family business, Maya. These things happen. This isn't right, she insisted. The board serves at my father's pleasure, I cut her off quietly. And this decision wasn't up for a vote. Maya had been with me almost from the beginning, one of my first hires when we began turning the company around. She knew better than most what I had sacrificed for Northstar. So, you're just going to accept this? She pressed. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't say that. Later, as guests began to depart, David approached me, champagne glass still in hand, his cheeks flushed with alcohol and triumph. No hard feelings, sis? He said, slinging an arm around my shoulders. You know I'll still need your help with all the operational stuff. He waved his hand vaguely, encompassing the entirety of what I had built with that dismissive gesture. I extricated myself from his half-embrace. Congratulations, David. It's getting late and I have an early meeting tomorrow. He frowned slightly. Don't be like that. This is a family celebration. Yes, I agreed coolly. And I've celebrated enough for one night. I found my father speaking with our lead investor near the door. He excused himself when he saw me, approaching. There's my girl, he said warmly, as if he hadn't just systematically undermined everything I'd worked for. "Quite a night, isn't it?" "Why?" I asked simply, keeping my voice low. His expression softened into something between condescension and pity. "Rebecca, you've always been brilliant at operations, but a CEO needs different qualities: charisma, vision, the ability to inspire people. And you think David has those qualities?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "He has natural leadership presence," my father insisted. "People are drawn to him. And frankly, it's important for Northstar to be led by someone who can be the face of the company for decades to come." The implication hung between us, unspoken but clear. A son would carry the family name forward in a way a daughter could not. "I see," I said, and I truly did. In that moment, everything crystallized. 12 years of subtle cues and not-so-subtle messaging aligned into perfect clarity. No matter what I achieved, no matter how I transformed the company, I would always be the supporting character in my father's story. The daughter who helped until the son was ready. "Don't look so disappointed," my father said, patting my arm. "Your role is still crucial. David will need your expertise." I summoned a smile. "Of course. It's late, Dad. I should get going." "We'll talk more tomorrow," he promised. 9 o'clock in my office?" I nodded and kissed his cheek. The perfect, dutiful daughter until the end. The drive home to my apartment in Queen Anne Hill was a blur. Seattle's familiar streets passed by my window as my mind raced, cycling through disbelief, anger, and ultimately, resolve. By the time I parked in my designated spot beneath my apartment building, a plan was already forming. I kicked off my heels in the entryway of my minimalist apartment and headed straight for my home office. The clock read 11:22 p.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. I powered up my computer and entered the password to my private cloud storage. Not the company cloud, but my personal archive, where I had methodically documented every significant decision and contribution I'd made to Northstar over the years. Call it paranoia or foresight, but I had learned early in my career that women in business needed to keep receipts. Every time my ideas were attributed to male colleagues, every time I was talked over in meetings only to have the same suggestion, praised when repeated by someone else, taught me the value of meticulous documentation. I pulled up the folder labeled Governance and began reviewing the company's formation documents, operating agreements, and shareholder structures. As the company had grown, we had gone through several reorganizations. With each round of funding, the equity structures had shifted. Most people, including my father, had lost track of the complex web of voting rights and ownership percentages, but I hadn't. In particular, I focused on the documents from our Series C funding 3 years ago. During that round, when we needed additional capital to scale manufacturing, I had personally invested a significant portion of my savings in exchange for preferred shares with specific governance provisions. At the time, my father had been so focused on the major institutional investors that he had paid little attention to the family contribution portion of the round. What he didn't realize, what no one had bothered to understand except the lawyers, and me, was that those shares came with specific protections regarding leadership changes and major company decisions. As I reviewed the language, a cold certainty settled over me. My father's announcement wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was potentially a violation of our governance agreements. I glanced at my watch. Nearly midnight now. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Maya. "Need to talk first thing tomorrow. My office, 7:30 a.m. No one else." Her reply came seconds later. "I'll bring coffee. Strong coffee." Next, I texted our outside counsel, Caroline Webb. "Urgent review needed. Northstar governance docs regarding executive appointments. Early morning call tomorrow?" Caroline, ever the diligent attorney, responded despite the hour. "Available. 7 a.m. Send specific sections you want reviewed." I attached the relevant documents and then sat back in my chair, staring at the Seattle skyline visible from my window. lights twinkled across Elliott Bay, ferries silently crossing the dark water. The city that housed our headquarters, the place where my father had built his dream, and where I had transformed that dream into something so much more substantial. Part of me wondered if I should just walk away, start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere, my contributions would be valued properly from the beginning. I had received offers over the years. Competitors, tech giants, venture firms, all eager to poach the woman who had engineered Northstar's remarkable turnaround. But walking away meant surrendering everything I had built. It meant watching my brother run the company into the ground while my father gradually realized his mistake. It meant abandoning the employees who had trusted my leadership, the innovative products still in our pipeline, the patients whose lives were improved by our technology. No, walking away wasn't an option, not after everything I had sacrificed. I closed my laptop and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment. The city stretched before me, most buildings dark at this hour, but a few lights still burning in downtown offices where other dedicated souls worked late. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and made a promise to myself. By this time tomorrow, everyone at Northstar would understand exactly who had built this company and who would continue to lead it forward. The alarm jarred me awake at 5:30 a.m. after barely 3 hours of fitful sleep. I rose immediately, the urgency of the day ahead cutting through my exhaustion. I showered quickly, the hot water doing little to wash away the sting of last night's announcement, and dressed with particular care, a charcoal gray suit that subtly conveyed authority, paired with a deep blue blouse that brought out the intensity in my eyes. I skipped breakfast, unable to stomach food with the confrontation looming ahead. Instead, I reviewed my notes one final time before heading to the office. The early morning traffic was light, Seattle still waking up as I pulled into the executive parking garage beneath the gleaming glass tower that housed Northstar's headquarters. The space next to mine, marked CEO, and usually occupied by my father's Tesla, was still empty. Good. I needed this head start. Maya was already waiting in my office when I arrived, 2 large cups of coffee in hand and dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had slept even less than I had. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting, handing me one of the coffees. "Good morning to you too," I replied, setting down my bag and taking a grateful sip. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "are we plotting a coup or searching for new jobs?" A faint smile crossed my face. Option 1. Definitely option 1. Caroline joined us via video conference a few minutes later, her expression grave as she held up the documents I had sent her. "Rebecca, these provisions are clear. Your Series C shares include specific rights regarding leadership transitions. Any CEO appointment requires approval from holders of preferred shares, and as the largest holder of those shares, you effectively have veto power over this decision." Maya let out a low whistle. "So your father can't just install David without your consent?" "It's more complicated than that," Caroline cautioned. "The legal language is clear, but challenging your father publicly could tear the company apart. Investors hate family drama." "I'm well aware," I said. "That's why we need to handle this precisely and definitively." I outlined my strategy to them both, refining it with their input, anticipating my father's and brother's likely reactions. By 8:45, we had a solid plan in place. Maya left to discreetly gather the financial data we would need, while Caroline prepared to join us in person for the 9 a.m. meeting with my father. I sat alone in my office for those final minutes, centering myself for what was to come. On my computer screen was a photo taken 2 years ago at our company retreat. My father and I standing side by side on a stage, announcing the successful launch of our newest product line. We were both smiling, his arm around my shoulders, genuine pride in his eyes as he looked at me. Where had that gone? When had he decided I wasn't enough to carry his legacy forward? A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in. Your father asked if you could come to his office instead. David is already there. Of course he was. Thank you, Stephanie. Please tell my father I'll be right there once our general counsel arrives. She nodded, clearly sensing the tension, but professional enough not to comment. 5 minutes later, Caroline arrived, impeccably dressed and carrying a leather portfolio containing our documentation. She gave my arm a reassuring squeeze as we walked toward my father's corner office. "Remember," she murmured, "you're not just legally right. You're right for the company." We paused outside my father's door. Through the glass wall, I could see him and David seated at the conference table in his office, heads bent together, in conversation, matching expressions of confidence on their faces. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping into the battlefield with my head held high. My father looked up as Caroline and I entered his office, his expression momentarily confused by the presence of our general counsel. David lounged in the chair beside him, already occupying the power position at the table, his casual posture a stark contrast to the significance of the moment. "Rebecca," my father greeted, checking his watch. Right on time, though I wasn't expecting Caroline to join us for what's essentially a family discussion. "Good morning, James," Caroline said smoothly, addressing my father with professional formality despite their years of acquaintance. Given the nature of the leadership transition being discussed, I thought it prudent to be present. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "I see." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, sit." I chose the seat directly across from David rather than my usual place at my father's right hand. Caroline sat beside me, quietly arranging her documents on the table. "I thought we could discuss the transition timeline," my father began. "All business now. David will need a few weeks to get up to speed on the CEO responsibilities. Rebecca, if you could prepare comprehensive briefings on all ongoing operations." "Before we discuss any transition," I interrupted calmly, "there's a governance matter we need to address." David sighed dramatically. "Come on, Becca. Don't make this difficult." I ignored him, maintaining eye contact with my father. When we completed our Series C funding 3 years ago, specific provisions were included regarding leadership appointments. As the holder of preferred shares from that round, I have certain rights that need to be considered. My father's expression darkened. "What exactly are you saying?" Caroline slid a document across the table. "This section outlines the approval requirements for C-suite appointments, particularly the CEO position. As Rebecca holds 30% of the preferred shares from Series C, her approval is required for this transition." My father scanned the document, the color slowly draining from his face as he recognized the language. He had signed these papers himself, though I knew he had never read the fine print. He had always left those details to the lawyers and to me. "This is a technicality," he said finally, pushing the paper away. "The board will support my decision." "The board can't override these provisions," Caroline replied. "They're binding." David leaned forward, his casual demeanor evaporating. So what? You're going to block me because your feelings are hurt?" "Real mature, Rebecca." I met his gaze steadily. "This isn't about feelings, David. This is about who's qualified to lead Northstar. And you think that's you?" He scoffed. "You're great with spreadsheets and operations, sure, but Northstar needs a visionary leader, someone who can inspire people, who knows how to build relationships. Northstar needs a leader who understands its products, its market, and its challenges," I countered. "Someone who has proven they can deliver results, not just promises." My father raised his hand to silence our brewing argument. "Enough. This isn't productive." He turned to me, his expression a mixture of disappointment and calculation. "Rebecca, what do you want? A different title? Higher compensation? We can work something out that addresses your concerns while respecting my decision." The condescension in his tone ignited something deep within me. He still didn't get it. After all these years, after everything I had accomplished, he still saw my objections as merely negotiating for perks rather than standing on principle. "What I want is what's best for Northstar," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "And that begins with qualified leadership." I opened my laptop and turned it to face him. On the screen was a presentation I had prepared during those early morning hours. A detailed comparison of my accomplishments at Northstar versus David's, the company's growth trajectory under my operational leadership, and projections for our future based on maintaining consistent strategic direction. "These aren't just numbers," I said as he scrolled through the slides. "This is the story of how Northstar became what it is today. I led the turnaround when we were nearly bankrupt. I secured the partnerships that put our technology in hospitals worldwide. I built the team that developed our next-generation products." My father's jaw tightened as he continued reviewing the data. David, peering over his shoulder, grew increasingly agitated. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't reduce leadership to KPIs and growth metrics." "Actually, you can," I replied. "Results matter. Experience matters. Vision without execution is just a daydream, and you have yet to successfully execute on any venture you've undertaken." David flushed, anger replacing his usual smug confidence. "Dad, are you going to let her talk to me like this?" My father closed my laptop slowly, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like static electricity. Before a storm. "Caroline," he said finally, "could you give us a moment alone, please?" Our general counsel glanced at me questioningly. I nodded slightly, and she gathered her documents. "I'll be in the legal department if you need me," she said, closing the door quietly behind her. Once we were alone, my father sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 64 years. When did this become so complicated? When did my family turn into corporate adversaries? "When you decided to hand the company I built to someone who hasn't earned it," I answered honestly. "The company you built?" David's voice rose. "That's rich. Dad started Northstar before you even started kindergarten." "And it was failing. When I joined," I shot back. Ask him where Northstar would be if I hadn't restructured everything from the ground up." My father stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked downtown Seattle. Morning fog still clung to the tops of the taller buildings, the Space Needle rising above it like a sentinel. He remained silent for so long that I wondered if he had even heard me. "James Chen built this company," he said finally, using his own name as if speaking of someone else. "That's what everyone will remember. The immigrant who arrived with nothing, who built a medical technology company from scratch. That's the legacy I've spent my life creating." He turned back to face us, his gaze shifting between David and me. "But you're right, Rebecca. Where would Northstar be without you? Probably bankrupt years ago. I know that. I've always known that." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Dad, let me finish," my father cut him off. "The truth is, I wanted David to take over because he reminds me of myself at his age. Ambitious, charismatic, willing to take risks." His expression softened as he looked at me. "You've always been more like your mother. Practical, thorough, steady. Those qualities saved your company," I said quietly. "Yes," he acknowledged. "They did, but they aren't the qualities that built it in the first place." "With respect," I replied, "the company you built is not the company that exists today. Northstar has evolved beyond your original vision. We're not just a scrappy startup anymore. We're responsible for technology that saves lives, for 300 employees and their families, for investors who have trusted us with their capital." I stood and walked over to join him by the window. The Northstar of today doesn't need a risk-taker at the helm. It needs someone who can balance innovation with stability, someone who understands every aspect of the business, from product development to regulatory compliance to financial modeling. My father turned to look at me, really look at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Not as his daughter, not as his COO, but as the leader I had become. And you believe that's you? It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I know it is, and deep down, so do you. David pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. This corporate coup. David, my father said wearily, sit down. No. You promised me this position. You announced it publicly. How does it look if you walk that back now? Everyone will know Rebecca strong-armed you with some legal technicality. My father's gaze hardened. Is that what you're concerned about? How it looks? David faltered. No, of course not. I'm concerned about Northstar's future, just like both of you. Then prove it, I challenged him. What's your vision for Northstar? Not vague platitudes about growth and innovation. Specific strategies. How would you address our manufacturing bottlenecks? What's your plan for navigating the changing regulatory landscape in Europe? How would you handle the integration of the Meridian acquisition? David opened his mouth, then closed it again, his expression darkening. This isn't a job interview. Isn't it? I countered. You're applying to lead a $75 million company with hundreds of employees. Why shouldn't? You have to demonstrate your qualifications? My father raised his hand again, silencing our exchange. He moved back to the conference table and sat heavily in his chair, gesturing for me to join him. After a moment of hesitation, David sat down as well. We have 3 options, my father said, his voice taking on the pragmatic tone he used when negotiating difficult contracts. 1, we proceed with my announcement, and Rebecca exercises her legal right to block it, likely resulting in a messy public dispute that harms the company. David crossed his arms but remained silent. 2, we find a compromise. Perhaps a co-CEO arrangement or a different position for David that acknowledges his importance to Northstar's future while retaining Rebecca in operational control. Neither David nor I looked particularly enthusiastic about that option. Or 3, my father continued, I reconsider my decision in light of the information and perspectives shared today. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched my father weigh the options. After what felt like an eternity, he leaned back in his chair and drew a deep breath. I built Northstar from nothing, he said quietly. But Rebecca, you rebuilt it when it was on the verge of collapse. You've earned the right to lead it forward. David shot to his feet. You can't be serious. After everything you said last night. Last night I was thinking like a father, my father interrupted. This morning, I need to think like a founder. The company comes first. The look of utter betrayal on David's face would have been satisfying if it weren't so raw. He stared at our father in disbelief, then at me with naked hostility. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You might have won this round, but don't think for a second that I'm just going to disappear. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the awards displayed on my father's shelves. After he left, my father and I sat in silence. The victory I had fought for suddenly hollow in the face of my brother's pain and my father's evident exhaustion. He'll calm down eventually, my father said, though he didn't sound convinced. Will he? I asked. Or will this just deepen the rift between us? My father reached across the table and took my hand, an unexpectedly tender gesture from a man who rarely showed physical affection. Family is complicated, Rebecca, especially when it's tangled up with business. But David is resilient in his own way. He'll find his path. I squeezed his hand before letting go. And what about us? Where do we go from here? He smiled sadly. Forward as always. I owe the board an explanation, and we'll need to make a new announcement. But first, I owe you an apology. I underestimated you, not just yesterday, but perhaps for longer than I care to admit. The acknowledgement was both validating and painful. How many years had I spent seeking his recognition, only to receive it now through confrontation rather than cooperation? Let's worry about the board later, I said. Right now, I'm more concerned about the company. We need to stabilize things. Quickly, reassure employees, partners, and investors that Northstar remains on solid ground despite this. Hiccup. My father nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Always thinking of the business first. You really are the right person to lead Northstar. I learned from the best, I replied, offering an olive branch. Your vision got us started. I just helped refine it for today's realities. He stood, signaling the end of our discussion. Well, CEO Chen, you have a company to run. I should let you get to it. The title sounded strange. I had never truly allowed myself to imagine hearing it directed at me. But right. Deeply, undeniably right. What will you do? I asked as we walked to the door together. He shrugged, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it momentarily startled me. I've been thinking it might be time to step back a bit. Maybe take on a chairman emeritus role, focus on mentoring young entrepreneurs. I've been doing this a long time, Rebecca. Perhaps too long. The admission of fatigue from a man who had always projected boundless energy was jarring, but also humanizing. For the first time in many years, I saw my father not as the indomitable James Chen, founder and CEO, but simply as my dad, aging, flawed, but ultimately wanting the best for his family and his legacy. You'll always have a place at Northstar, I assured him. Your experience is invaluable. As is your leadership, he replied. Now, shall we inform Caroline of our decision? I imagine she's waiting anxiously for news of whether we've declared corporate war on each other. I smiled, the tension of the morning finally beginning to ease. Let's tell her together. News travels quickly in any organization, but in a company built on cutting-edge technology, it moves at light speed. By noon, everyone at Northstar knew that there had been a significant shift in the succession plan announced the previous evening. By 2 o'clock, the official company-wide email had gone out, explaining that after careful consideration, I would be assuming the role of CEO while my father transitioned to chairman emeritus. David's name was conspicuously absent from the communication. Maya orchestrated the messaging masterfully, working with our PR team to frame the change as a natural evolution rather than a dramatic reversal. Northstar Technologies continues its tradition of visionary leadership, as Rebecca Chen steps into the CEO role, building on the strong foundation established by founder James Chen, read the press release that went to industry publications and investors. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from employees, partners, and board members, many of whom, I suspected, had been quietly concerned about David's appointment in the first place, but had been too diplomatic to voice their doubts. Our stock price, which had dipped slightly after the initial announcement, rebounded by market close. On the surface, the transition appeared seamless. Beneath that surface, however, turbulent currents were forming. I found Maya in my office late that afternoon, analyzing the initial reactions to our announcement. The board seems relieved, she reported, scrolling through emails on her tablet. Martinson from Sequoia Capital actually wrote, and I quote, "Thank God for sanity prevailing." I smiled despite my exhaustion. And our employees? Mostly positive, particularly among the senior staff who've worked with you for years. Some confusion from newer team members who don't know the full backstory. A few loyal to your brother are being quiet, probably waiting to see which way the wind blows. I nodded, unsurprised. And David? Any word? Maya's expression darkened. He cleared out his office about an hour ago. Didn't say goodbye to anyone, just had IT help him pack his computer and personal items. She hesitated before adding, "He was seen heading to your father's office afterward." That gave me pause. My father didn't mention anything. They were behind closed doors for about 20 minutes. No raised voices that anyone could hear. Maya shrugged. "Make of that what you will." The thought of my father and brother conferring privately sent an uneasy ripple through me. Had my father's apparent capitulation been sincere, or was he already crafting some alternative plan with David? "Keep your ear to the ground," I told Maya. "I don't want to be paranoid, but I also don't want to be blindsided again." "Already on it," she assured me. "I have friends in every department. If anything suspicious happens, we'll know." After Maya left, I stood at my office window, watching the afternoon light glint off Elliott Bay. The victory I had secured that morning felt precarious, as if built on shifting sand rather than solid ground. I had won the battle for leadership, but at what cost to my family relationships? And what might David do in retaliation? My contemplation was interrupted by a gentle knock. My father stood in the doorway, his expression somber. "May I come in?" he asked, a formality he had never before observed when entering my office. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the small seating area by the window. "Is everything all right?" He settled into one of the chairs, clasping his hands in his lap. "David has resigned from Northstar, effective immediately." Though Maya had prepared me for this possibility, hearing it confirmed sent a jolt through me. Did he say why? My father gave me a pointed look. "I think we both know why." I sat across from him, maintaining my composure. "What will he do next?" He didn't share his plans with me, but he asked for his full share of stock options to be vested immediately. That was concerning. David's options, while not as substantial as mine, still represented a significant voting bloc within the company. "And what did you tell him?" "That the vesting schedule is governed by our compensation committee and isn't something I can unilaterally change." My father sighed. He didn't take it well. "I can imagine," I murmured, mentally calculating the potential implications. If David were to align his existing shares with other investors dissatisfied with the sudden leadership change, he could potentially create problems at the next shareholder meeting. "He's hurt, Rebecca," my father continued. "Not just professionally, but personally. He feels betrayed by both of us." Guilt tugged at me, though I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about sibling rivalry. It was about the future of a company that affected hundreds of lives. "I never wanted to hurt him," I said truthfully. "But Northstar has to come first. You taught me that." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose I did." After a moment of silence, he added, "There's something else. Your mother is quite upset with me." That surprised me. My mother rarely involved herself in business matters, maintaining a careful separation between family and company affairs. "Why?" She said I should have known better, that I spent so many years overlooking your contributions that I couldn't see what was plainly in front of me. He looked up, his eyes tired but clear. She was right, of course. Mothers usually are. The admission caught me off guard. My father had never been one for self-reflection or acknowledging his mistakes. "Dad, He raised his hand, stopping me. "No need for platitudes. What's done is done. The question now is how we move forward." His expression grew serious. "As chairman emeritus, I'll remain on the board, but my role will be advisory. The company is yours to lead. Are you ready for that?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with decades of complex history. Was I ready? I had been preparing for this role for 12 years, building the skills, knowledge, and relationships necessary to guide Northstar through its next phase of growth. And yet, the reality of sitting in the CEO's chair, my father's chair, carried a gravity I couldn't fully grasp until this moment. "Yes," I said finally, my voice firm. "I'm ready." He studied me for a long moment before nodding, apparently satisfied with what he saw. Good. Then my first piece of advice as chairman emeritus is this: watch your back. David may have left the building, but I doubt he's finished with Northstar, or with you. The warning sent a chill through me, not because it was unexpected, but because hearing it from my father confirmed my own suspicions. David wasn't the type to accept defeat graciously. He would be plotting his next move, and I needed to be prepared. "Thank you for the advice," I said. "I'll keep it in mind." My father stood, our conversation apparently concluded. At the door, he paused, turning back with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You know, when you were born, I was disappointed." The blunt admission stung, despite my years of suspecting as much. "I wanted a son," he continued, his voice matter of fact. "In the traditional Chinese family, sons carry on the family name, the family business. That's how I was raised to think." His expression softened slightly. "But watching you today, your strategic thinking, your composure under pressure, your unwavering commitment to the company, I realized something important." He straightened, his posture reflecting the dignity that had always characterized him in public settings. "You're not just better for Northstar than David would have been, you're better than I was." Before I could respond to this unprecedented acknowledgement, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I sat motionless, processing his words. For years, I had worked tirelessly to earn my father's approval, to prove myself worthy of the company he had founded. Now, having finally received the validation I had long sought, I found myself wondering if it was too little, too late. The relationship between us had fundamentally changed today, shifted into something new and as yet undefined. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Board meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Full attendance expected. They want to hear directly from you about your vision for Northstar." Reality quickly reasserted itself. I had fought for this position, and now I had to prove I deserved it, not just to my father or the board, but to everyone who depended on Northstar's success. Personal feelings would have to wait. I pulled up the strategic plan I had been developing for months, documents I had created with the quiet hope that someday I might have the opportunity to implement them as CEO. That someday had arrived sooner, and under more tumultuous circumstances than I had anticipated, but I was prepared nonetheless. As evening fell, casting long shadows across my office, I immersed myself in preparation for the next day's meeting, determined to start my tenure with a clear demonstration of the leadership Northstar needed. The company I had helped build to $75 million was poised for even greater growth, and I would be the one to guide it there. Despite the family drama, despite David's potential machinations, despite the weight of stepping into my father's considerable shadow, Northstar was mine. Now, when I intended to make it soar, response. The boardroom at Northstar Technologies had always intimidated me, even after years of presenting quarterly results and strategic initiatives within its walls. The massive table of polished walnut, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Seattle's skyline, the portraits of pioneering medical researchers that lined the walls, everything about the space was designed to convey power and prestige. This morning, however, as I took my seat at the head of the table, my father's former position, I felt a different kind of tension. The board members filed in silently, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned to cautiously optimistic. These were experienced business leaders, venture capitalists, and industry experts who had invested their money, time, and reputations in Northstar. They deserved clear answers about the abrupt leadership change and confident direction for the company's future. My father arrived last, deliberately taking a seat midway down the table, rather than at the head or even by my side. The message was clear. This was my meeting to lead, my company to run. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement of his subtle support. "Good morning," I began once everyone was settled. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this special session. I recognize that yesterday's announcement regarding leadership changes at Northstar came as a surprise to many of you, and you deserve a full explanation. I proceeded to outline the events of the previous day's confrontation in clinical, corporate terms, omitting the more personal aspects of our family drama while emphasizing the legal frameworks that had influenced the decision. I then moved directly into my vision for Northstar's future, presenting the strategic plan I had refined late into the previous night. Our core technology platform has positioned us as leaders in non-invasive monitoring, I explained, advancing through my presentation slides. But the healthcare landscape is evolving rapidly. To maintain our competitive advantage, we need to expand in 3 key directions. I detailed my plan for enhancing our AI capabilities to improve predictive diagnostics, accelerating our international expansion focusing on emerging markets in Southeast Asia, and developing a consumer-facing product line that would complement our professional medical devices. For each initiative, I provided market analysis, resource requirements, and projected financial outcomes. When I finished, the room remained silent for several long seconds. Then Gerald Whitman, the veteran venture capitalist who had led our Series B funding round, leaned forward. "That's an ambitious plan, Rebecca," he said, his tone neutral. "Considerably more aggressive than what your father presented at our last strategy session." I met his gaze directly. "The market won't reward timidity, Gerald. We've built a solid foundation over the past decade. Now it's time to leverage that foundation for exponential rather than incremental growth." He nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his expression. "And what about the elephant in the room? Your brother's departure creates potential instability. How do you plan to address that?" I had anticipated this question and was prepared with my answer. David's decision to leave Northstar was his own. While I regret the circumstances, the company's operational continuity is not at risk. Our executive team remains intact, and I've already begun discussions with several highly qualified candidates who could strengthen our leadership in areas where we need additional expertise. Victoria Mendez, the former pharmaceutical executive who had joined our board the previous year, spoke next. "I'm concerned about perception issues. The market doesn't like family drama in publicly traded companies. How do we reassure investors that this situation is resolved rather than just beginning?" My father cleared his throat, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. "If I may address that question?" I nodded, curious about what he would say. "The decision to elevate Rebecca to CEO was ultimately mine," he stated firmly, rewriting history in a way that made me momentarily admire his political instincts. After careful consideration, I determined that her operational expertise and strategic vision are exactly what Northstar needs at this stage of growth. While the timing of the announcement may have seemed abrupt, the underlying logic is sound. This isn't family drama, it's sound business judgment. Victoria didn't appear entirely convinced, but she nodded in acknowledgement of his statement. "If there are no further questions about the leadership transition," I said, "I'd like to focus on the strategic initiatives I've outlined and get your input on implementation priorities." The conversation shifted to more comfortable territory as board members engaged with the substance of my plan, debating timelines, resource allocation, and market approach. By the time we adjourned 2 hours later, I had secured provisional approval for my strategic direction and a clear mandate to move forward as CEO. As the board members filtered out, my father remained behind, waiting until we were alone before approaching me. "Well handled," he said, his tone suggesting genuine admiration. "Especially the way you redirected from the family issues to the business strategy. That's exactly what the board needed to hear." "Thank you," I replied, gathering my presentation materials. "Does this mean you support the expansion plans? You've always been more conservative about entering consumer markets." He smiled slightly. "It means I recognize that Northstar is in different hands now, with different ideas. My views on consumer products are well known, but perhaps it's time for fresh perspectives." He paused, his expression growing more serious. Have you spoken with your mother since yesterday? I shook my head. Not yet. I've been focused on preparation for today. You should call her. She's worried about both of you. Both of us? You mean me and you? You and David, he clarified. She tried reaching him last night but got no response. She's afraid of what he might do in his current emotional state. The reminder of my brother's volatility dampened the satisfaction I felt from the successful board meeting. I'll call her this afternoon, I promised. But first, I need to address the executive team. They deserve to hear directly from me about the new direction. My father nodded. Of course, CEO duties first. He turned to leave, then hesitated. One more thing, Rebecca. David cleared out more than just his office yesterday. A sense of foreboding washed over me. What do you mean? According to IT security, before he left, he downloaded several files from the shared drive. Files containing product roadmaps, customer contracts, and intellectual property documentation. My stomach dropped. That's a violation of his NDA. Why didn't security stop him? Because he used his executive credentials, which hadn't yet been revoked. The system flagged the unusual download volume, but by the time they investigated, he was already gone. I clenched my jaw, anger mingling with anxiety. Do we know exactly what he took? It is compiling a complete list. I've asked Caroline to prepare cease and desist letters and review our legal options. He looked at me with genuine concern. I warned you he wouldn't go quietly. I'd be a fool to have expected otherwise, I replied, already mentally shifting into crisis management mode. Thank you for letting me know. I'll speak with Caroline immediately. After my father left, I stood alone in the boardroom, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The clear morning had given way to typical northwest clouds, a fitting metaphor for how quickly my moment of triumph had been overshadowed by new threats. David had taken company secrets, valuable information that could damage Northstar if shared with competitors or used to start a rival business. The question was, what did he intend to do with it? I spent the rest of the day in a whirlwind of activity, meeting with the executive team to outline our new strategic direction, consulting with Caroline about legal responses to David's data, theft, speaking privately with key employees who might be uncertain about the leadership change, and finally, late in the afternoon, calling my mother. She answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting by the phone. Rebecca? Are you all right? Her voice, warm and concerned, nearly broke through the professional composure I had maintained all day. I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. Your father told me what happened. All of it. There was a pause before she added, I always knew this day would come, though I had hoped the circumstances would be different. You knew? I couldn't hide my surprise. My mother had always seemed detached from Northstar's inner workings. That you would eventually run the company? Of course. I've watched you dedicate your life to building it, sacrificing personal relationships, free time, everything for Northstar's success. Another pause. I just wish your father had seen it sooner, and that David could have found his own path, rather than trying to claim yours. Her words were validating in a way that even my father's reluctant acknowledgement hadn't been. She had seen me, truly seen me, all along. Have you heard from David? I asked, redirecting the conversation to my more immediate concern. A heavy sigh came through the line. No, he's not answering calls or texts. That's not like him, Rebecca. I'm worried. David had always been close to our mother, calling her regularly and stopping by her house for impromptu visits. His silence now was indeed concerning. I'm sure he just needs time, I said, attempting reassurance. This has been a shock for everyone. Maybe, she conceded, though she didn't sound convinced. But when your brother feels wronged, he doesn't just lick his wounds. He plans. It was the same warning my father had given, and coming from my typically optimistic mother, it carried even more weight. I know, I admitted. We've discovered he took confidential company information before he left. Our legal team is addressing... Oh, Rebecca. Her voice carried a weight of sadness. Please be careful. I don't want to see my children at war with each other. I didn't start this, Mom. It doesn't matter who started it. What matters is how it ends. She sighed again. Promise me you'll try to talk to him, not just through lawyers. He's still your brother. I made the promise, though I had serious doubts about David's willingness to have a civil conversation with me anytime soon. After ending the call, I sat at my desk, emotions I had suppressed all day finally surfacing. Anger at David's betrayal, concern about his intentions, lingering hurt from my father's long-standing preference for his son. And beneath it all, a persistent question. Was Northstar worth the cost to my family? My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Security alert. David just showed up at Meridian Biotech's headquarters, meeting with their CEO right now. My heart sank. Meridian Biotech was one of our main competitors, a company that had been trying to develop technology similar to ours for years without success. If David was meeting with their CEO, there could only be one reason. He was planning to sell them the information he had stolen. With shaking hands, I dialed Caroline. We have a problem, a big one. The next 48 hours became a blur of emergency meetings, legal consultations, and strategic planning sessions. Caroline mobilized our legal team, securing a temporary restraining order against David to prevent him from sharing Northstar's confidential information. We notified key customers and partners about potential data security concerns, framing it as a proactive measure rather than a reaction to internal sabotage. And I personally called the CEO of Meridian Biotech, making it clear that any use of Northstar's intellectual property would result in immediate and aggressive litigation. What's mine? Each move in our legal counterattack was necessary, but potentially damaging to Northstar's reputation if news of the internal conflict leaked to the press. I spent sleepless nights weighing our options, consulting with trusted advisors, and preparing for various scenarios. By the third morning of my unexpected ascension to CEO, it became clear that simply reacting to David's moves wouldn't be sufficient. I needed to get ahead of him, to neutralize the threat before it could materialize. I called Maya into my office at 7 a.m., before most of the staff had arrived. She entered carrying 2 large coffees, dark circles under her eyes matching my own. You look like you need this more than I do, she said, sliding one of the cups toward me. I accepted it gratefully. Any updates from our sources at Meridian? Maya had cultivated an impressive network of contacts throughout the industry over the years, including a former Northstar employee who now worked in Meridian's finance department. According to Jamie, their executive team had an all-hands meeting yesterday afternoon. Very hush-hush, but word is they're excited about some new strategic opportunity that could accelerate their development timeline. She grimaced. Sounds like your brother made quite an impression. I took a long sip of coffee, using the moment to steady myself. What about the restraining order? Has it been served yet? Caroline confirmed it was delivered to his apartment yesterday evening. No response so far. The temporary restraining order would prevent David from sharing our proprietary information, but enforcement would be challenging. Once the data was in Meridian's hands, the damage would be done, regardless of subsequent legal victories. We need to do more than just threaten legal action, I said, standing to pace near the windows. The restraining order buys us time, but David's already moved faster than we anticipated. What are you thinking? Maya asked, her expression alert despite her obvious fatigue. I turned back to face her. Remember Project Phoenix? Her eyes widened. The contingency plan you developed after the Johnson & Johnson partnership nearly fell apart? Rebecca, that's a nuclear option. And we're facing a nuclear threat, I replied grimly. David doesn't just want to damage Northstar, he wants to destroy what I've built. He's always been vindictive, even as a child. Now he has the means and motivation to actually hurt us significantly. Project Phoenix was a defensive strategy I had quietly developed 2 years earlier when a key partnership had teetered on the brink of collapse due to external factors. It involved a series of rapid, coordinated actions designed to safeguard Northstar's most valuable assets and relationships during a crisis. We had never implemented it, but all the components remained ready for activation. If we do this, Maya cautioned, there's no going back. And your father? My father is no longer CEO, I interrupted, my voice harder than intended. I softened my tone before continuing. He placed Northstar in my hands. Now I have to protect it, even if he disagrees. With my methods. Maya studied me for a long moment before nodding decisively. All right. What's our first move? Call the executive team together for an emergency meeting at 8:30. Only the inner circle. You, me, Caroline, Dr. Patel from R&D, and Ben from operations. We'll need complete secrecy for this to work. As Maya left to arrange the meeting, I opened my laptop and accessed a secure folder labeled innocuously as Market Research 2023. Inside were the detailed protocols for Project Phoenix, each component meticulously planned and updated over the years as our business evolved. I had created these contingencies hoping never to use them. Now they represented our best chance at protecting everything we had built. The executive team gathered in the small, secure conference room adjacent to my office rather than our usual meeting space. I had instructed Maya to ensure the room had been swept for listening devices, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days ago, but now felt necessary. Dr. Ananya Patel, our brilliant head of research and development, arrived first, followed by Ben Reeves, our seasoned operations director. Caroline joined us last, carrying a thick folder of legal documents. They all wore expressions of concern mixed with curiosity. Thank you for coming on such short notice, I began once Maya had closed and locked the door. What I'm about to share is strictly confidential and will not leave this room. I outlined the situation with David and Meridian Biotech, providing more details than had been broadly shared within the company. Then I explained Project Phoenix. The plan has 3 core components, I continued, distributing printed documents to each person. First, technology protection. Dr. Patel, this involves implementing the alternative encryption protocols we developed for our source code and immediately accelerating the version 7 modifications to our core algorithms. Ananya nodded thoughtfully. The modifications would make the version 6 information David has significantly less valuable. But Rebecca, version 7 is still 3 months from being ready for implementation. I need it in 2 weeks, I replied firmly. Whatever resources you need, people, computing power, budget, you'll have it. She looked skeptical, but nodded again. We'll make it happen. Second, I continued, operational firewalling. Ben, we need to immediately restructure our production processes to create separation between critical components. No single manufacturer should have access to enough information to replicate our technology. Ben frowned, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. That will increase costs and potentially slow production in the short term. I understand. Consider it an insurance premium we're now willing to pay. And the third component? Caroline asked, her legal mind already processing the implications of what I had outlined. Strategic realignment, I said, meeting each person's gaze in turn. We accelerate the partnerships we've been cultivating with University Hospital Systems and Singapore Medical Group. Pull those deals forward by 6 months, even if it means offering more favorable terms. We need to lock in our market position before any compromised information can be weaponized against us. Maya, who had been taking notes, looked up with concern. The board hasn't approved accelerating those deals, especially with concessions. They will when they understand the alternative, I replied confidently. Caroline, we'll need a special board session tomorrow morning. Caroline nodded. I'll arrange it. But Rebecca, I should note that these actions, while legally defensible, represent a significant departure from the conservative approach your father typically favored. Some board members may resist. Then we'll need to be persuasive, I said simply. Because the alternative is watching David sell our technology to Meridian and potentially cripple the company we've all worked so hard to build. The room fell silent as each executive considered the gravity of the situation and the boldness of the response I was proposing. Finally, Ben spoke up. I've been with Northstar for 9 years, he said slowly. Seen us grow from a struggling startup to an industry leader. If this is what it takes to protect that progress, I'm in. Ananya nodded her agreement. My team will deliver version 7 in 2 weeks. We'll work around the clock if necessary. The legal department is at your disposal, Caroline added. We'll provide whatever support is needed to execute this plan, while minimizing exposure. Maya, who knew me better than anyone else in the room, simply gave me a subtle nod of support. She had seen firsthand how much I had sacrificed for Northstar, how deeply I cared about its mission beyond personal ambition or family drama. Then we're agreed, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders, even as a new sense of responsibility settled in its place. Project Phoenix begins now. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Patel mobilized her research team, establishing round-the-clock shifts to accelerate the version 7 modifications. Ben began the complex process of segregating our manufacturing processes, flying personally to our production facilities in Oregon and Texas to oversee the changes. Caroline drafted the necessary legal documents for our accelerated partnerships, while Maya coordinated with me to prepare for the critical board presentation. Throughout this whirlwind, I maintained outward calm and confidence, never letting my team see the emotional toll the situation was taking. Each night, I returned to my empty apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the constant activity of my days. In those quiet hours, doubt would creep in. Was I overreacting? Would these dramatic measures alienate the board, the very people whose support I needed to cement my position as CEO? Was I allowing my personal conflict with David to cloud my business judgment? On the third evening, as I sat at my dining table, reviewing documents for the board meeting, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Peering through the peephole, I was surprised to see my mother standing in the hallway, a canvas tote bag in her hand. "Mom?" I said as I opened the door. "Is everything all right?" She smiled tiredly. "That's what I came to ask you. You haven't been answering my calls." Guilt washed over me. In the chaos of implementing Project Phoenix, I had screened my calls, responding only to business matters. Several missed calls from my mother had gone unanswered. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Things have been intense at work." She looked around my apartment, taking in the papers spread across my dining table, the multiple coffee cups, the general disarray that reflected my mental state. Without comment, she headed to my kitchen and began unpacking the contents of her tote bag. Containers of homemade food, a loaf of fresh bread, a bottle of wine. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" she asked, her tone matter-of-fact, rather than judgmental. I had to think about it. "Lunch yesterday, maybe? I've been grabbing whatever's available." She shook her head slightly, moving efficiently around my kitchen as she reheated the food she had brought. The familiar smell of her signature beef noodle soup filled the apartment, instantly transporting me back to childhood dinners around our family table. "Sit," she instructed, placing a steaming bowl in front of me along with a glass of water. "You can't fight battles on an empty stomach." I complied, suddenly aware of how hungry I actually was. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. "Your father told me about the emergency board meeting tomorrow. He's concerned about the scale of changes you're proposing. I set down my spoon, immediately on guard. Did he send you to talk me out of it? She gave me a look of mild reproach. I'm not your father's messenger, Rebecca. I came because I was worried about you. She reached across the table to cover my hand with hers. And because I thought you might need someone to talk to who isn't directly involved in the company. Drama. The simple kindness of her gesture, combined with the exhaustion of the past few days, cracked something inside me. To my horror, I felt tears welling in my eyes. It's all happening so fast, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. 1 minute I'm fighting for the CEO position, the next I'm implementing emergency protocols to protect the company from my own brother. My mother squeezed my hand. Tell me about these protocols. What exactly are you planning? I hesitated. The details of Project Phoenix were confidential, shared only with my most trusted executives. But my mother had always been a skilled listener and often provided unexpected insights. Perhaps an outside perspective was exactly what I needed. Over the next hour, I outlined the key components of our defensive strategy, explaining the technological modifications, operational changes, and accelerated partnerships. My mother listened attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to talk through the plan in my own words. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. It's a bold approach, she said finally. Aggressive even. Not what I would have expected from you. What does that mean? I asked, uncertain whether her comment was criticism or observation. Just that you've always been the methodical one, the careful planner. This plan has elements of your father's style, taking big risks when backed into a corner. She smiled. Slightly. It seems you've inherited more from him than either of you realized. I hadn't considered that perspective. The comparison to my father was unexpected but not entirely unwelcome. For all our differences, his business instincts had built Northstar from nothing. Do you think it's too extreme? I asked, suddenly craving her honest assessment. The board might see it that way. She considered the question seriously before answering. I think it's proportional to the threat. David has always been impulsive but determined when he sets his mind to something. If he's aligned himself with your competitors, half measures won't be sufficient. Her pragmatic support bolstered my confidence. Dad may not see it that way. Your father is struggling with complicated feelings, she replied carefully. Disappointment in David. Surprise at his own misjudgment. Pride in you, mixed with the discomfort of having underestimated you for so long. She sighed softly. He'll come around to supporting your approach once he processes those emotions. But the board meeting tomorrow won't give him enough time for that. So what should I do? I asked, feeling momentarily like a child seeking parental guidance rather than the CEO of a $75 million company. Be the leader Northstar needs, she said simply. Present your plan with conviction, address concerns directly, and make it clear that this isn't about family drama, but about protecting the company's future. She paused before adding, and perhaps acknowledge that while the measures are dramatic, they reflect the serious nature of the threat rather than a personal vendetta against your brother. Her advice was sound, cutting through my emotional entanglement to focus on the business essentials. We spent another hour refining my board presentation, my mother offering suggestions to frame the more controversial aspects in terms the conservative board members would appreciate. When she finally gathered her things to leave, I walked her to the door feeling more centered and prepared than I had in days. Thank you, I said, embracing her, for the food, the advice, everything. She held me tightly for a moment. That's what mothers do. As she pulled away, she added, one more thing, Rebecca. Have you considered reaching out to David directly? Not through lawyers, but sister to brother? The suggestion made me tense immediately. He wouldn't take my call. Perhaps not, she acknowledged. But attempting reconciliation, even if rejected, demonstrates good faith. Something the board might appreciate seeing alongside your defensive measures." I nodded, not committing, but acknowledging the wisdom in her suggestion. After she left, I returned to my dining table and stared at my phone for several long minutes before finally picking it up and dialing David's number. As expected, the call went straight to voicemail. After the beep, I hesitated, then spoke from the heart rather than from the carefully constructed script I might have prepared. "David, it's Rebecca. I know things are difficult between us right now, and I understand your anger. But what you're doing could damage more than just me or Dad. It could hurt hundreds of employees who depend on Northstar for their livelihoods." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "If you're willing to talk, I am too. Not as CEO and former executive, but as siblings who used to share the same dreams for this company. Please call me back." I ended the call, doubting he would respond but feeling I had at least made the attempt. Setting the phone aside, I returned to my board presentation, incorporating my mother's suggestions and refining my arguments until well past midnight. The board meeting the next morning would determine not just the fate of Project Phoenix, but potentially the future of Northstar itself. As I finally prepared for bed, I realized that despite the uncertain outcome, I felt strangely at peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it knowing I had fought with every resource and strategy at my disposal to protect the company I had helped build from the ground up. Sleep came surprisingly easily, dreams filled not with anxiety, but with determination. The boardroom at Northstar Technologies had never felt more intimidating than it did that morning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished conference table where 12 board members sat in varying states of concern and curiosity. My father occupied his usual seat, his expression unreadable as I positioned myself at the head of the table, a physical declaration of my new authority that felt both appropriate and presumptuous. "Thank you all for accommodating this emergency session," I began, my voice steadier than I had anticipated. "I appreciate your time and attention to what I believe is a critical inflection point for Northstar's future." Gerald Whitman, our most senior board member and a longtime friend of my father, leaned forward slightly. "Your message indicated this concerned a security threat. I think we all deserve to understand exactly what's happening before any dramatic actions are taken." Several heads nodded in agreement. I had deliberately kept the meeting request vague, knowing that explicitly mentioning David's actions in writing could create documentation that might later leak to the press. "Of course," I agreed. "Let me be direct. We have confirmed that a significant amount of proprietary information was downloaded from our secure servers 3 days ago, including details of our core technology, customer contracts, and development roadmaps." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Victoria Mendez, the former pharmaceutical executive who had joined our board the previous year, frowned deeply. "Are we talking about a data breach? External hackers?" I met her gaze. "Directly. The access was internal. My brother, David Chen, downloaded these files using his executive credentials shortly before his departure from the company." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My father shifted in his seat, but remained quiet. "We have further confirmation," I continued, "that David met with executives at Meridian Biotech the following day. As you know, Meridian has been attempting to develop competing technology for years without success." "Has the information been transferred to Meridian?" asked Michael Torres, representing our largest institutional investor. "We don't have confirmation either way," I admitted. "We've obtained a temporary restraining order preventing David from sharing the information, but enforcement is challenging after the fact." The atmosphere in the room grew tenser. Board members exchanged concerned glances, and my father's expression darkened further. "What exactly are you proposing, Rebecca?" Gerald asked, his tone suggesting he already suspected my answer wouldn't be to his liking. This was the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and launched into my presentation of Project Phoenix, explaining each component methodically while emphasizing the business rationale rather than the personal conflict that had necessitated it. In summary, I concluded 15 minutes later, these measures will significantly mitigate the potential damage from any intellectual property compromise. They require immediate implementation and, yes, substantial resources in the short term. But the alternative, allowing a competitor to leapfrog years of R&D using our own technology, would be catastrophic for Northstar's market position and valuation. As I finished speaking, I could practically feel the boardroom dividing into camps. Victoria and Michael nodded thoughtfully, along with 3 other members who had historically supported aggressive growth strategies. Gerald and my father remained stone-faced, while the remaining 5 members showed varying degrees of concern or skepticism. Gerald was the first to respond. These measures seem extraordinarily aggressive for what might be an overcautious reaction. David may have taken files, yes, but we don't know that he intends to share them with Meridian. This could be nothing more than an emotional response to a difficult situation. With respect, I countered. David's meeting with Meridian's executive team the day after downloading our proprietary information strongly suggests intent. Waiting for confirmation of data transfer would mean waiting until after the damage is done. Victoria nodded. I agree with Rebecca's assessment of the risk. In my experience, industrial espionage often comes from within, and the timing here is highly suspicious. My father finally spoke, his voice carefully measured. I understand the concern, but Project Phoenix represents a significant departure from our established business practices and would accelerate partnerships we've deliberately paced for strategic reasons. He looked directly at me. I wonder if personal feelings might be clouding business judgment here. The implied criticism stung, but I had anticipated it. Remembering my mother's advice, I acknowledged the concern directly. It's a fair question, I said, meeting his gaze. And I've asked it of myself repeatedly over the past 3 days. Are these measures colored by my personal conflict with David? Perhaps. But they're also based on a clear-eyed assessment of the risk to Northstar's most valuable assets. I turned to address the full board. If I were being purely emotional, I would be pursuing aggressive legal action against David personally, seeking damages and public retribution. Instead, I'm focused entirely on protecting the company's future, regardless of how we arrived at this juncture. Michael Torres nodded approvingly. I appreciate that distinction. The question for this board isn't about family dynamics, but about business risk management. And frankly, the risk Rebecca has outlined warrants a strong response. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, with board members debating each component of Project Phoenix in detail. I answered every question thoughtfully, acknowledging concerns while gently but firmly returning the conversation to the core issue: protecting Northstar's intellectual property and market position. Throughout the exchange, I noticed my father, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not quite approval, but something close to reassessment, as if seeing me through new eyes. Finally, Gerald called for a vote. We've discussed this thoroughly. The proposal before us is to approve the immediate implementation of Project Phoenix as outlined by CEO Rebecca Chen, with a budget allocation not to exceed $12 million for accelerated development and restructuring costs. The vote proceeded around the table, with Victoria, Michael, and 2 others quickly voicing approval. 3 board members expressed reservations, but ultimately voted yes. The remaining 2 sided with Gerald in opposition, citing concerns about hasty action and unnecessary expense. All eyes turned to my father, whose vote would break the 5-5 tie. He sat silently for a long moment, his hands clasped before him on the table. I founded Northstar with a simple goal, he said finally: to create medical technology that would improve patients' lives. Everything else, growth, profits, market position, was secondary to that mission. He looked around the table before his gaze settled on me. Rebecca reminded me of that mission when she joined the company 12 years ago. She has consistently prioritized creating value for patients and protecting Northstar's ability to fulfill its purpose. He straightened in his chair. While I have reservations about the scope and speed of these measures, I trust that they come from the same commitment to Northstar's core mission that has guided her work from the beginning. Therefore, I vote to approve Project Phoenix. Relief washed over me, though I maintained my professional composure. "Thank you," I said, addressing the entire board, but particularly my father. "I promise this trust won't be misplaced." As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out of the room with varying expressions of concern or support. My father remained behind, waiting until we were alone before approaching me. "That was well handled," he said quietly. "You've become quite the strategist." "I learned from watching you," I replied, beginning to gather my presentation materials. He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but you've developed your own style, more methodical than mine, more attentive to details." He paused before adding, "It serves you well as CEO." The comment, simple as it was, represented perhaps the most direct endorsement he had ever offered of my leadership capabilities. "Thank you," I said, meeting his gaze. "Your support made the difference today." "The plan would have deserved support regardless of who presented it," he replied. "It's solid, if aggressive." His expression grew more serious. "Have you heard from David?" I shook my head. I left him a voicemail last night offering to talk. No response. My father nodded, unsurprised. "He'll reach out eventually when his anger cools. David has always cycled through emotions quickly. That's part of what makes him charming in good times and volatile in bad ones." "And dangerous now?" I added softly. "Yes," he acknowledged with evident sadness. "But Project Phoenix will help mitigate that danger." He reached out and briefly squeezed my shoulder, an unusual gesture of physical affection from him. "Keep me informed on the implementation. As Chairman Emeritus, I'm still available for consultation if needed." After he left, I remained in the boardroom for several minutes, absorbing what had just transpired. With the board's approval secured, Project Phoenix would move forward immediately. Dr. Patel's team would accelerate the version 7 modifications. Ben would restructure our manufacturing processes, and Maya would begin negotiations to fast-track our strategic partnerships. And I, newly affirmed as CEO, would coordinate it all while continuing to manage the ongoing operations of a $75 million company in the midst of a family crisis turned business emergency. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Board approved?" "Yes," I replied. "Full implementation starting now." Her response came quickly. "Team already on standby. Let's do this." As I gathered my things to leave, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Determination tinged with sadness, triumph shadowed by the knowledge that my brother was now actively working against everything we had built together. But beneath those conflicting feelings lay a bedrock of clarity. Northstar was my responsibility now, and I would protect it with every strategy and resource at my disposal. The next phase of our response to David's betrayal was about to begin. The implementation of Project Phoenix proceeded with remarkable efficiency over the next 2 weeks. Dr. Patel's research team, working around the clock in rotating shifts, completed the version 7 modifications 3 days ahead of even our accelerated schedule. Ben successfully restructured our manufacturing processes to create what he called knowledge firewalls between production facilities, ensuring no single contractor had access to our complete technology. And Maya, demonstrating the negotiation skills that had made her such a valuable CFO, secured accelerated partnership agreements with both university hospital systems and Singapore Medical Group on terms more favorable than we had initially projected. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, I maintained a punishing schedule, beginning each day at 5 a.m. and often working past midnight. I met daily with each team lead, resolved countless implementation challenges, and personally briefed key customers and investors to maintain confidence in Northstar despite the unusual activities. Conspicuously absent in all this time was any response from David. The temporary restraining order had been successfully served, but our legal team had no confirmation he was complying with its terms. Our industry contacts reported continued meetings between David and Meridian Biotech executives, though the content of those discussions remained unknown. By the end of the second week, as the core components of Project Phoenix neared completion, the silence from David had become more worrying than reassuring. Caroline expressed concern that we hadn't seen any legal response from either David or Meridian to our restraining order, unusual in corporate conflicts of this nature. They're either complying quietly or planning something we haven't anticipated, she warned during our morning briefing. What kind of something? I asked, rubbing my temples to alleviate the headache that had become a constant companion. Could be anything from a countersuit claiming wrongful termination to some kind of PR offensive painting you as the villain in a family drama. She frowned thoughtfully, though the complete silence is atypical for either approach. The answer came later that afternoon in a form none of us had anticipated. I was in a meeting with our marketing team, discussing how to message the upcoming release of our version 7 technology, when Maya burst into the conference room, her usually calm, demeanor visibly shaken. "Rebecca, you need to see this immediately," she said, holding up her tablet. I excused myself and followed her to my office, where she immediately pulled up a business news website. The headline made my blood run cold. Medical tech startup. Zenith Diagnostics announces revolutionary monitoring platform. Former Northstar executive at the helm. The accompanying photo showed David standing proudly beside Meridian Biotech's CEO, both smiling broadly as they demonstrated a device that looked disturbingly similar to Northstar's core technology. "He started a new company," I whispered, scanning the article quickly. "Backed by Meridian and using our technology." Maya nodded grimly. The press release claims their platform represents a groundbreaking advance in non-invasive monitoring. They're positioning it as a next-generation alternative to existing solutions, meaning us. I continued reading, my alarm growing with each paragraph. The article detailed Zenith Diagnostics' plans to launch their first product within 6 months, an accelerated timeline that would only be possible if they were building on existing technology rather than developing from scratch. David was quoted extensively, praising Meridian's vision and claiming his new role as Chief Innovation Officer would allow him to fulfill the potential of medical monitoring technology in ways that conservative market incumbents have failed to explore. The next 3 days passed in a carefully orchestrated flurry of activity. Our legal team filed for injunctive relief against Zenith Diagnostics, citing specific patent infringements and requesting an immediate halt to product development. Our investor relations department issued measured statements expressing confidence in Northstar's market position and technological advantages, and our version 7 modifications were rushed into final testing, preparing for an accelerated public launch that would render much of David's stolen information obsolete. Throughout this crisis response, I maintained outward calm and confidence, never revealing to my team the turmoil of emotions beneath the surface. Each night, alone in my apartment, I battled waves of anger, betrayal, and occasional self-doubt. Had I pushed David to this extreme by fighting for the CEO position? Could I have found a compromise that would have kept him within Northstar rather than turning him into our most dangerous competitor? On the 4th day after David's announcement, my father requested a private meeting in his office, now technically a visitor's space since he had transitioned to chairman emeritus. I found him standing by the window gazing out at the Seattle skyline, his posture conveying a weariness I had rarely seen in him. "I spoke with David," he said without preamble as I closed the door behind me. My pulse quickened. "What did he say?" My father turned from the window, his expression grave. "He's not backing down. In fact, He seemed almost pleased by our legal response, said it validates that Zenith is a genuine threat rather than an empty gesture. Did he admit to using our technology? Not directly. He claims he's drawing on his deep understanding of medical monitoring principles developed during his time at Northstar. My father's tone made clear what he thought of that claim. But he did reveal something concerning. Meridian has committed $40 million to Zenith's launch, with David receiving a significant equity stake alongside his executive position. I sank into the chair across from his desk, processing this information. $40 million is an enormous bet on unproven technology. They must be confident in what David provided them. Or confident in the market confusion it will create, regardless of the product's actual viability. My father sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly. Rebecca, there's something else you should know. I think this goes beyond business. For David. What do you mean? When I pressed him about his motivations, he said something troubling. He said, "For once, Dad will see what I can build without Rebecca overshadowing me. This isn't just about Northstar's technology or even professional jealousy. He's trying to prove something to me and to himself." The revelation wasn't entirely surprising, but hearing it confirmed added a new dimension to our conflict. This wasn't merely corporate espionage. It was a deeply personal attempt by David to establish his own legacy, separate from mine. That complicates things, I admitted. If this is about his need for validation rather than just business opportunity, he'll be willing to push boundaries we wouldn't expect from a rational competitor. My father nodded solemnly. Exactly. Which is why I'm concerned our current strategy may not be sufficient. What do you suggest? He leaned forward, his expression shifting from that of a concerned father to the shrewd businessman who had built Northstar from nothing. We need to change the narrative. Right now, the market sees this as David Chen, innovative entrepreneur, versus Rebecca Chen, corporate executive. That framing works in his favor, regardless of the technology's actual merits. I considered his perspective. You're right. Meridian is counting on that David versus Rebecca storyline to generate interest and confusion in the market. But how do we change it? By making this about the patients, he replied simply. That's what Northstar has always been about. Not family drama, not corporate competition, but developing technology that improves people's lives. A strategy began forming in my mind, building on my father's insight. We accelerate not just the technical modifications, but our entire approach to the market. Release preliminary clinical data showing the superiority of our technology. Partner with leading physicians to emphasize the importance of proven reliability in medical monitoring. Position Zenith, not as an innovative alternative, but as an unproven risk when patient outcomes are at stake. My father's eyes lit up with approval. Exactly. David can claim innovation, but he can't claim a decade of clinical validation and patient safety data. That's your advantage, not your position as CEO, but the years you've spent perfecting technology that actually works reliably in hospital settings. For the first time since David's announcement, I felt a sense of clarity and direction cutting through the emotional haze. This wasn't about defending my position or even Northstar's market share. It was about protecting the integrity of medical technology that patients depended on, something I had dedicated my professional life to advancing. Thank you, I said, meeting my father's gaze. This helps reset my perspective. Sometimes, we need to step back to see the full picture, he replied with a slight smile. Something I wish I had done more often over the years. I left his office with renewed determination and a refined strategy. That afternoon, I convened a special meeting with my executive team, our medical advisory board, and our marketing department. Together, we developed what we called the Patient First campaign, a multifaceted approach that would shift the conversation away from corporate drama and toward the clinical implications of medical technology choices. Over the next 2 weeks, Northstar executed this strategy with precision. We accelerated the publication of 3 clinical studies demonstrating the superior accuracy of our monitoring systems in critical care settings. We released testimonials from leading physicians emphasizing the importance of proven reliability in life or death situations. And we launched a thoughtful marketing campaign focused not on attacking competitors, but on educating hospital administrators about the rigorous validation process required for truly dependable medical technology. Meanwhile, our version 7 platform development raced forward, incorporating enhanced security features and performance improvements that would render much of David's stolen information obsolete. Dr. Patel's team worked miracles, completing in 3 weeks what would normally have taken 3 months. The market responded positively. After an initial dip following David's announcement, Northstar's stock gradually recovered and then exceeded its previous position as investors recognized our substantial competitive advantages. Hospital contracts that had been temporarily paused amid the uncertainty were reactivated, with several clients even accelerating their adoption timelines. Our legal action against Zenith proceeded more slowly, as expected. The court granted a partial injunction limiting certain aspects of their development work pending further review, but the core case would take months, if not years, to resolve completely. Still, even the partial victory sent an important message to the market about Northstar's determination to protect its intellectual property. Throughout this period, I maintained a punishing schedule, often working 16-hour days to juggle the crisis response alongside normal CEO responsibilities. The stress took its toll. I lost weight, slept poorly, and developed a persistent tension headache that medication barely touched. But I refused to show any weakness, knowing that the entire company was looking to me for leadership during this challenging time. One evening, nearly a month after David's announcement, I was working late in my office when Maya appeared in my doorway, concern evident in her expression. "Rebecca, when was the last time you left the building before 9 p.m.? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. I glanced at my watch, surprised to see it was already past 10. I need to finish reviewing these clinical summaries before tomorrow's investor call. She shook her head, entering my office and closing the door behind her. This isn't sustainable. You're running yourself into the ground, and the team is noticing. What do you mean? People are worried about you. They see you here first thing in the morning and last to leave every night. You've lost what, 15 pounds in a month? You barely eat during meetings. This morning you called Dr. Harrison by Dr. Patel's name twice in the same conversation. I winced at the last example. Dr. Harrison was our lead clinical researcher and a key ally in our patient-first campaign. Confusing his name was embarrassing and potentially damaging to an important relationship. I'm fine, I insisted, though my protest sounded hollow even to my own ears. This is a critical period for the company. Once we've stabilized the situation with Zenith, there will be another crisis, Maya interrupted gently. There always is. That's the nature of business, especially in a competitive industry like ours. If your response is to work yourself to exhaustion every time, you won't last a year as CEO. Her words landed with surprising weight. Despite our friendship, Maya rarely spoke to me with such direct criticism. The fact that she was doing so now suggested her concern was genuine and urgent. What would you have me do? I asked, gesturing to the stack of documents on my desk. These responsibilities don't disappear because I'm tired. Delegate, she replied simply. You've built a strong executive team, but you're still trying to handle everything personally. Trust us to carry more of the load. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's not that simple. The board is watching my every move as the new CEO, especially after the situation with David. I can't afford any mistakes. And you think working while exhausted reduces the risk of mistakes? Maya raised an eyebrow. Rebecca, the board approved your appointment because they believe in your leadership. Part of leadership is knowing when to step back and let your team support you. She was right, of course. In my determination to prove myself worthy of the CEO position, I had fallen into the trap of trying to control every aspect of our response to David's betrayal. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't even the most effective approach. Fine, I conceded. What do you suggest? First, go home and get a full night's sleep. These clinical summaries can wait until morning. She picked up the folder I had been reviewing. In fact, I'll take them now and prepare a condensed brief for you by 8 a.m. Maya, you don't have to. I want to, she insisted. That's what a team does. We support each other. She gave me a pointed look. Second, tomorrow we're restructuring your schedule. No more back-to-back meetings from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. You need breaks, time to think strategically rather than just reacting constantly. Her concern was touching, and her practical suggestions made sense. All right, I agreed, standing and gathering my things. But I expect that brief on my desk first thing tomorrow. She smiled, relieved that I was listening. It'll be there. Now go home before I have security escort you out. That night, for the first time in weeks, I left the office before 11 p.m. As I drove home through Seattle's light evening traffic, I found my thoughts drifting from work concerns to more personal reflections. The past month had been entirely consumed by responding to David's betrayal and securing Northstar's future. I had barely spoken to my mother, hadn't seen friends, hadn't even taken time to process the emotional impact of becoming CEO under such contentious circumstances. When I arrived at my apartment, instead of immediately checking emails as had become my habit, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window overlooking the city. Seattle sparkled below, peaceful from this distance despite the constant activity within its buildings and streets. Somewhere out there, David was probably still working too, equally determined to prove himself through Zenith's success. The thought of my brother brought a complex mix of emotions: anger at his betrayal, sadness at our fractured relationship, and a strange kind of empathy. Hadn't I also spent my entire career seeking validation? The difference was that I had channeled that need into building something valuable rather than trying to tear down someone else's work. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. I was tempted to ignore it, but the caller ID showed my mother's name. I had been avoiding her, calls, not wanting to discuss the situation with David, but Maya's advice about unsustainable habits extended to personal relationships as well. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to infuse my voice with more energy than I felt. "Rebecca," she replied, obvious relief in her tone. "I was beginning to think you were screening my calls permanently." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "Things have been incredibly busy with the company." "I know, I've been following the news." She paused before adding, "Your patient-first campaign is very impressive. It refocuses the conversation exactly where it should be." I smiled, pleased by her understanding. That was actually Dad's idea, at least the core concept. He suggested we move away from the family drama narrative. He mentioned that, she said. "He's quite proud of how you've handled this situation, though I doubt he's told you directly." "He's actually been surprisingly supportive," I admitted. More so than I expected, given his initial preference for David. My mother was quiet for a moment. "Your father is complicated, Rebecca. He loves both of you deeply, but he doesn't always understand how his actions affect you. I think seeing David's betrayal has forced him to reevaluate many of his assumptions." "About David? Or about me?" "Both," she replied simply. "Now, when are you coming for dinner? And don't tell me you're too busy. Even CEOs need to eat." Her gentle insistence brought a genuine smile to my face. "How about this Sunday?" "Perfect. I'll let your father know." Her tone softened. "And, Rebecca, I'm proud of you too. Not just for how you're handling the company, but for who you are." After we hung up, I felt something ease within me, a tension I had been carrying for so long I had almost forgotten it was there. My mother's simple affirmation meant more than any business success, reminding me that my worth wasn't measured solely by Northstar's stock price or market position. With that more balanced perspective, I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The following morning, true to her word, Maya had a concise brief of the clinical summaries on my desk when I arrived at 7:30 a.m. She had also reworked my schedule, creating blocks of time for strategic thinking and even a lunch break, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself since becoming CEO. The restructured schedule proved remarkably effective. With more space to think, rather than just react, I found myself developing more nuanced responses to challenges and identifying opportunities I might otherwise have missed. By delegating more effectively to my executive team, I not only reduced my own workload, but also empowered them to contribute their best thinking to our collective challenges. Over the following weeks, this more sustainable approach paid dividends for both Northstar and my personal well-being. The Patient First campaign continued to gain traction, effectively repositioning the conversation around medical monitoring. Technology. Our version 7 platform launched to strong reviews, with several major hospital systems immediately committing to upgrades. And our legal strategy, while still ongoing, had successfully limited Zenith's ability to directly copy our most valuable intellectual property. 2 months after David's initial announcement, Northstar had not only weathered the crisis, but emerged stronger. Our stock price had fully recovered and then risen an additional 12%. Employee morale had stabilized after the initial shock, with retention rates returning to normal levels. And most importantly, our mission of providing reliable, life-saving monitoring technology remained firmly at the center of everything we did. It was in this context of restored stability that an unexpected opportunity arose. Peter Wong, CEO of Singapore Medical Group and our newest strategic partner, requested a private meeting during his visit to Seattle. "Rebecca, I'll be direct," he said once we were seated in my office. "SMG has been impressed by your leadership during this challenging period. The way you've refocused attention on patient outcomes rather than engaging in corporate mudslinging speaks volumes about your priorities." "Thank you," I replied. "We believe the technology should ultimately serve patients, not corporate egos." He nodded approvingly. Precisely the perspective that drew us to Northstar initially. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. SMG is planning a significant expansion of our medical technology division across Southeast Asia. We're looking for a flagship partnership to anchor this initiative. My interest was immediately piqued. Southeast Asia represented a rapidly growing healthcare market with enormous potential for our monitoring systems. I assume Northstar is being considered for this partnership. "More than considered," Peter replied with a smile. "We want to make you our exclusive partner for patient monitoring technology throughout the region. This would include deploying your systems in over 200 hospitals and medical centers across 7 countries over the next 3 years." The scale of the opportunity was breathtaking. It would be the largest single contract in Northstar's history, potentially adding hundreds of millions in revenue over the partnership lifetime. "That's an extraordinary opportunity," I acknowledged. "May I ask why you're approaching us now, particularly given the recent challenges with Zenith?" Peter's expression grew more serious. "Actually, the Zenith situation influenced our decision positively. We had been evaluating several potential partners, including Meridian. When they announced their backing of Zenith with technology suspiciously similar to yours, it raised significant red flags about their business ethics. And our response? Confirmed what we already believed about Northstar's integrity. You focused on the merits of your technology and its importance for patient care rather than engaging in personal attacks. That aligned perfectly with SMG's values." He leaned forward slightly. "In healthcare, trust is paramount. We trust Northstar under your leadership." The validation was deeply satisfying, particularly coming from a sophisticated industry partner who had witnessed the entire Xanath controversy unfold. We would be honored to partner with SMG on this initiative. When would you like to begin formal discussions? How about now? Peter suggested with a smile. I've brought our preliminary proposal for your review. The meeting extended for several hours as we discussed the framework for what would become Northstar's most significant international expansion. By the time Peter left, we had outlined the core terms of an agreement that would transform Northstar's global footprint and secure our technology as the standard for patient monitoring across a region with nearly 2 billion people. That evening, I called an impromptu gathering of my executive team to share the news. Their reactions ranged from stunned silence to enthusiastic celebration as they grasped the magnitude of the opportunity. This changes everything, Maya said, champagne, glass in hand as we toasted the preliminary agreement. Not just financially, but strategically. This puts us so far ahead of Zenith and Meridian that they can't possibly catch up, even with David's stolen information. It's a testament to the foundation you built over the past 12 years, Ben added. This kind of partnership doesn't happen without a rock-solid reputation for both technology excellence and business integrity. As the celebration continued around me, I found myself in a moment of quiet reflection. Just 3 months ago, I had been fighting for the CEO position my father had promised to my brother. Now I was leading Northstar into its most ambitious expansion yet, with the full support of our board, our employees, and our partners. The journey had been far more tumultuous than I could have anticipated, with personal betrayal and corporate espionage transforming what should have been a straightforward leadership transition. Yet through that crucible, something unexpected had emerged, not just a stronger company, but a clearer sense of purpose and identity for myself as its leader. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Heard about SMG? Congratulations. Dinner on Sunday to celebrate? I smiled, typing back. Absolutely. Mom's cooking? His response came quickly. Of course. She's already planning the menu. And Rebecca, really proud of you. Those 5 simple words, sent casually via text after decades of seeking his approval, meant almost as much as the transformative partnership we had just secured. The path to this moment had been neither straight nor easy, but standing now at the helm of a company poised for unprecedented growth, I knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth every challenge. The next morning, I arrived at the office, earlier than usual, drawn by a sense of purpose rather than obligation. As I stood by the window watching Seattle come to life below, I reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful dinner when my father had announced David would take over as CEO. In just 3 months, I had fought for and won the leadership position I deserved. I had defended the company against my brother's betrayal. I had implemented strategic changes that strengthened Northstar's market position. And I had secured a partnership that would transform our global presence for years to come. None of it had been easy. The personal cost had been high, a shattered relationship with my brother, a strained period with my father, countless nights of stress and self-doubt. But through it all, I had remained true to the mission that had always guided my work, creating technology that improved patients' lives. As employees began filtering into the office, greeting me with newfound respect and confidence, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Northstar was where it belonged, in the hands of the person who had built it into what it had become. Not because of birthright or family connection, but because of dedication, vision, and proven capability. I had grown my father's struggling company into a $75 million industry leader, only to have him say my brother would take over. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of Northstar's next chapter. My chapter. And it would be one defined not by family drama, but by innovation, growth, and unwavering commitment to the patients whose lives depended on our technology. The company was mine now, and I had earned it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.